The crowd of passengers gasps as Officer Reeves places handcuffs on 16-year-old Zara Washington in first class. Flight attendant Bethany Palmer smirks triumphantly until Captain Raymond Morris strides down the aisle. "That's my daughter you're detaining," he announces. "And I'm not just her father, I'm your boss." Before we jump into this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. If this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss any of our true stories of justice served. Now let's find out how this entitled flight attendant's discrimination backfired spectacularly. Zara Washington stared at the email in disbelief, reading it for the 12th time that day. The prestigious National Youth Science Foundation had selected her research on sustainable aviation fuel as the winner of their annual competition. The prize, an all-expenses-paid first-class trip to London to present at the International Conference on Sustainable Aviation. "Dad," Zara called out, racing down the stairs of their modest Harlem brownstone. "I won! They picked my research!" Raymond Morris looked up from his newspaper, his face breaking into a proud smile. At 45, Raymond carried himself with the discipline of his 20 years in the Air Force, where he'd risen to the rank of colonel before transitioning to civilian aviation. "I knew you would," Raymond said, embracing his daughter. "Your mother is going to be ecstatic." What Zara didn't know was that Raymond had recently accepted a position as the Chief Operations Officer at Atlantic Airlines, the very company providing her first-class tickets to London. After decades as a commercial pilot, the promotion represented the pinnacle of his career, but he had kept the news quiet even from Zara, wanting her achievement to remain in the spotlight. "When do we leave?" Raymond asked, already mentally rearranging his schedule. "That's the thing," Zara replied, scrolling through the details. "The conference is during your training week with the new pilots. I'll have to go alone." Raymond frowned slightly. "I can try to reschedule." "Dad, I'm 16, not 6, Zara interrupted. "Besides, Mom already gave me the independence speech last week when I mentioned applying." Raymond chuckled, knowing his wife's tendencies. Dr. Amara Washington was one of New York's most respected neurosurgeons, brilliant, meticulous, and fiercely protective of their only daughter. "Speaking of your mother," Raymond said, "she'll want to prepare you for traveling while black." Zara rolled her eyes. "Dad, seriously, it's 2025. We've had a black female president. I think we're past all that." Raymond's expression grew serious. "Zara, your generation has made incredible strides, but there are still places and people that haven't caught up. First class is one of those spaces where some people think they know exactly who belongs and who doesn't." Zara thought back to the college campus tour last spring when a security guard had followed her through the science building, asking repeatedly if she was lost. Or the time at the upscale electronics store when the salesperson had ignored her questions about laptop specifications, assuming she couldn't afford anything in the shop. "I know, Dad," she conceded, "but I refuse to let other people's ignorance diminish my joy." Raymond smiled, seeing so much of Amara in their daughter. "That's my girl. Now, let's call your mother before she performs brain surgery on the wrong patient, because we didn't update her immediately." That evening, Dr. Washington returned from her hospital shift, and the family celebrated with takeout from Zara's favorite Ethiopian restaurant. As they ate, Amara offered practical advice about navigating spaces where Zara might encounter prejudice. "Keep your boarding pass visible at all times," Amara instructed. "Dress professionally for the flight. Have your conference credentials easily accessible. And remember—" "I know," Mom Zara interrupted. "Remain calm, speak clearly, and know my rights." "And if anyone gives you trouble," Amara prompted. "Document everything and call you or Dad immediately," Zara recited. "But Mom, it's going to be fine. Atlantic Airlines is supposed to be one of the most progressive carriers." Amara and Raymond exchanged glances. As successful black professionals, they both knew that progressive corporate policies didn't always translate to the behaviors of individual employees. The next 2 weeks passed in a flurry of activity. Zara refined her presentation, while Raymond secretly prepared for his new role as COO, planning to surprise Zara once she returned from London. The position would officially begin the day after her departure, allowing him to meet her at Heathrow when her flight landed. The night before her journey, Zara packed and repacked her suitcase, carefully selecting professional outfits that would help her blend in with the first-class business travelers. Her mother's words echoed in her mind, but she pushed them aside, focusing instead on the excitement of her first international solo trip and the opportunity to share her research with leading scientists from around the world. "You've earned this," she told her reflection in the mirror, "and no one can take that away from you." LaGuardia Airport buzzed with the usual morning chaos as Zara navigated the terminal, pulling her carry-on suitcase behind her. She'd arrived 3 hours early at her mother's insistence, allowing plenty of time for any potential complications. The check-in process went smoothly. The agent smiled as she verified Zara's first-class ticket and directed her toward the exclusive Atlantic Airlines lounge. "Just follow the signs to the elevator, take it to the 3rd floor, and show your boarding pass at the entrance," the agent instructed. "Congratulations on your achievement, by the way. We don't see many teenage scientists in first class." Zara thanked her and headed toward the elevator, confidence building. Maybe her parents had been overly cautious after all. That feeling evaporated the moment she stepped into the Atlantic Airlines first-class lounge. The plush space fell momentarily quiet as several pairs of eyes turned to assess the newcomer. Zara straightened her shoulders and approached the reception desk, where a flight attendant with a nameplate reading Bethany Palmer was reviewing passenger manifests. "Good morning," Zara said, sliding her boarding pass across the counter. "I'm flying to London on Flight 207. Bethany looked up, her practiced smile faltering slightly as she glanced from the boarding pass to Zara's face. At 43, with 20 years of experience at Atlantic Airlines, Bethany prided herself on knowing exactly what a first-class passenger looked like, and to her, a black teenager in jeans and a blazer didn't fit the down profile. "You're in first class?" Bethany asked, making no move to scan the boarding pass. "Yes," Zara replied, keeping her tone even. "I'm presenting at the International Conference on Sustainable Aviation." Bethany reluctantly scanned the pass, her eyebrows rising when the system confirmed Zara's first-class status. "It appears to be valid," she said, her tone suggesting something improper. "May I see your ID as well?" Zara provided her passport, which Bethany scrutinized for an uncomfortably long time before finally returning it. "The lounge offers complimentary breakfast beverages and workstations," Bethany explained mechanically. "Please keep noise to a minimum, as many of our passengers are business travelers preparing for meetings." "Thank you," Zara replied, collecting her documents and moving toward an empty table near the window. As she settled in, Zara noticed Bethany whispering to another flight attendant, a blond man in his 30s whose name tag read Derek Foster. Though she couldn't hear their exact words, their glances in her direction made the subject of their conversation obvious. "Standards for the lounge," Derek muttered loud enough for Zara to catch fragments. "Probably some diversity program." Bethany responded with an eye roll. Zara took a deep breath, remembering her mother's advice. She opened her laptop and focused on reviewing her presentation slides, determined not to let their prejudice affect her. For the next hour, Zara observed how differently Bethany treated other lounge guests. Businessmen received coffee refills without asking. An elderly white couple was offered newspapers and magazines. A family with a toddler was provided with coloring books and special snacks. Meanwhile, Bethany had walked past Zara's table at least 6 times without offering any assistance despite her empty water glass. When the pre-boarding announcement for Flight 207 came over the speakers, Zara packed up her belongings and joined the line forming at the lounge exit. Bethany, who was escorting first-class passengers to the gate, did a double-take when she saw Zara in the queue. "First-class passengers only at this time," she announced, looking directly at Zara. "I am in first class," Zara replied, holding up her boarding pass. "Seat 2A. A flash of displeasure crossed Bethany's face before she composed herself. "Very well. Follow me, everyone." As they walked toward the gate, Bethany chatted amicably with the other passengers, asking about their destinations and offering travel tips for London. She didn't say a single word to Zara. The boarding process began with Bethany scanning passes at the gate. When Zara presented hers, Bethany once again asked for additional identification despite having already verified it in the lounge. No other passenger received similar scrutiny. "Protocol," Bethany said curtly when she caught Zara's questioning look. Zara said nothing, but as she walked down the jet bridge, she couldn't help wondering if her parents had been right after all. The first-class cabin of Atlantic Airlines Flight 207 was a world away from the economy section Zara had experienced on previous family vacations. Wide leather seats with adjustable features stretched out before her, each with its own entertainment system and privacy divider. Fresh flowers adorned the bulkhead wall, and crystal glasses waited at each seat for the pre-takeoff champagne service. Zara found her window seat and stowed her carry-on bag in the overhead compartment. As she settled in, admiring the premium amenities, a middle-aged man in an expensive suit took the aisle seat beside her. Calvin Reed, he introduced himself with a friendly smile, extending his hand. "Heading to London for business or pleasure?" "Zara Washington," she replied, shaking his hand. "I'm presenting at a conference on sustainable aviation." Calvin's eyebrows shot up with interest. "Impressive. You must be someone's prodigy. Whose lab are you representing?" "My own research, actually," Zara explained. "I developed a new method for producing aviation fuel from agricultural waste that reduces carbon emissions by nearly 40%. "Remarkable," Calvin said. "My daughter is about your age, but she's more interested in TikTok than transforming the aviation industry. Your parents must be incredibly proud." Before Zara could respond, Bethany appeared with a tray of beverages, offering champagne to Calvin with a warm smile. "And for you, miss," she asked Zara, with noticeably less enthusiasm. "Apple juice, please," Zara requested. Bethany nodded curtly and moved on to serve other passengers, never returning with Zara's drink. When she passed by again distributing hot towels, Zara politely reminded her about the apple juice. "I'll bring it shortly," Bethany replied, but 20 minutes later, as the plane prepared for takeoff, Zara's seat remained conspicuously empty of any beverage. Calvin, who had observed the interaction, flagged down another flight attendant, Sandra Miller, according to her nameplate, and requested apple juice for Zara. "Of course," Sandra replied, returning promptly with the drink. As passengers settled in, Bethany made her final cabin check, stopping abruptly at Zara's seat. "Excuse me," she said, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear, "but I need to verify your boarding information again." "There seems to be some confusion about seat assignments." Zara felt her cheeks warm as several passengers turned to look. "There's no confusion," she replied calmly. "This is my assigned seat. It's just unusual for someone so young to be traveling alone in first class," Bethany persisted. "May I ask how you obtained this ticket?" The question hung in the air, its implication clear to everyone listening. Zara didn't belong there. "I won it," Zara began to explain, "through the National Youth Science Foundation competition for my research on—" "I see," Bethany interrupted dismissively. "Well, let me check the manifest again to make sure you're in the correct seat." Calvin cleared his throat. "Excuse me, but I watched you check this young lady's boarding pass at the gate. Her name is on the manifest Zara Washington seat, 2A. I saw it myself when you were assigning seats." Bethany's face flushed with embarrassment, which quickly transformed into barely concealed resentment. "I'm simply following security protocols," she insisted, before moving away. "Thank you," Zara said quietly to Calvin. "No thanks necessary," he replied. "I've seen this movie before." For the next 15 minutes, as the plane taxied toward the runway, Zara noticed Bethany making notes on a small pad, occasionally glancing in her direction with narrowed eyes. Despite having done nothing wrong, Zara couldn't shake the feeling that she was being documented as a problem passenger. The plane accelerated down the runway and lifted into the air, carrying Zara toward her London conference and toward a confrontation that would prove far more significant than she could have imagined. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Raymond Morris speaking. On behalf of Atlantic Airlines, I welcome you aboard Flight 207 to London Heathrow. We're currently climbing to our cruising altitude of 35,000 feet. Weather conditions look favorable, and we anticipate an on-time arrival. The seatbelt sign will remain illuminated until we reach cruising altitude. Thank you for choosing Atlantic Airlines." Zara smiled at the sound of her father's voice over the intercom. Although they wouldn't see each other until landing at Heathrow, knowing he was piloting the aircraft gave her comfort. She decided against mentioning their connection to anyone on board, preferring to maintain her independence on this journey. Have you ever been in a situation where someone wrongly assumed you didn't belong? Comment below with your experience. If you believe Zara should tell someone her dad is the captain, type yes in the comments. If you think she should handle this on her own, type NO. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more true stories of justice being served. Now, let's see how this situation continues to unfold. Once the seatbelt sign turned off, Bethany began the first-class meal service, distributing linen tablecloths and premium dishware to each passenger. When she reached Zara, she practically tossed the tablecloth onto the tray table. "Will you be dining with us today?" Bethany asked, her tone suggesting Zara might not understand the concept of fine dining. "Yes, thank you," Zara replied, maintaining her composure. "The adult menu includes wine pairings," Bethany continued. "I assume you'll want the children's meal instead." Calvin interjected before Zara could respond. "She's clearly not a child. Perhaps you could treat her with the same respect you've shown other first-class passengers." Bethany's smile tightened. "Of course, sir. I'm simply trying to accommodate all our guests appropriately." The meal service proceeded with Bethany providing minimal attention to Zara while lavishing care on other passengers. When Zara requested a second roll, Bethany responded, "We need to ensure there's enough for everyone despite having offered seconds to others." After finishing her meal, Zara retrieved her laptop to review her presentation. The screen displayed detailed molecular diagrams of her sustainable fuel compound, along with graphs comparing carbon emissions between traditional and sustainable aviation fuels. Bethany, passing by with a coffee service, glanced at Zara's screen and paused. The complex chemical structures and technical diagrams caught her attention, but instead of recognizing them as scientific research, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. "What exactly are you working on?" Bethany asked, her voice carrying an edge that drew attention from nearby passengers. "My presentation for the International Conference on Sustainable Aviation," Zara explained. "It's about a new biofuel compound that could reduce the aviation industry's carbon footprint." Rather than acknowledging this impressive achievement, Bethany's suspicion only seemed to deepen. She continued down the aisle, then pulled head flight attendant Sandra Miller aside near the galley. "That teenager in 2A is looking at suspicious diagrams," Bethany whispered urgently. "Chemical compounds, fuel systems, it looks concerning." Sandra frowned. "She mentioned she's presenting at a conference, Bethany. She's probably just a student." "In first class, with detailed information about aircraft fuel systems," Bethany countered. "In today's climate, we can't be too careful. I'm going to document this in the incident report." Sandra hesitated. "Maybe we should give her the benefit of the doubt. She seems perfectly harmless." "That's what they want you to think," Bethany insisted. "I've been flying for 20 years, Sandra. I know when something doesn't add up." While the flight attendants conferred, Zara excused herself to use the restroom, leaving her laptop open on her tray table. As soon as the lavatory door closed, Bethany seized the opportunity. "I need to conduct a security check," she murmured to Sandra, approaching Zara's seat. Before Sandra could object, Bethany quickly rummaged through Zara's backpack, finding conference materials with Zara's name and credentials. The folder clearly identified her as a keynote speaker at the prestigious event, with letters of recommendation from leading scientists praising her revolutionary research. Instead of recognizing her mistake, Bethany's expression hardened. "She could have fabricated these documents," she whispered to Sandra. "Why would a legitimate science conference invite a teenager as a keynote speaker?" When Zara returned to her seat, she immediately noticed her belongings had been disturbed. Her carefully organized folder was slightly askew, and her backpack had been moved from where she'd tucked it. "Excuse me," Zara said as Bethany passed. "Did someone go through my things while I was in the restroom?" I conducted a routine security check, Bethany replied unapologetically. It's standard procedure when passengers leave items unattended. That's not true, Calvin interjected from his seat. I've been flying first class for 15 years, and I've never had my personal belongings searched when I visit the restroom. Sir, with all due respect, security protocols are not up for discussion, Bethany responded tersely. Privacy laws and personal property rights are certainly up for discussion. Zara countered, her patience wearing thin. You had no right to search my belongings without consent. The confrontation was drawing attention. An elderly couple across the aisle watched with concern while a businessman 2 rows ahead turned around to observe the developing situation. Young lady, if you continue to create a disturbance, I'll be forced to take further action, Bethany threatened quietly. I'm not creating a disturbance, Zara replied, keeping her voice steady. I'm objecting to having my constitutional rights violated. The Constitution doesn't apply at 35,000 feet, Bethany snapped. Airline security takes precedence over your perceived rights. The elderly woman across the aisle spoke up. That doesn't sound right, dear. My husband was a judge for 30 years, and I don't believe basic rights are suspended during air travel. Other passengers began murmuring among themselves. Some supported Bethany, suggesting that extra security was always warranted in today's climate. Others sided with Zara, troubled by what appeared to be discriminatory treatment. Bethany's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. This conversation is over. I suggest you lower your voice and enjoy the remainder of the flight, she told Zara before stalking away toward the front galley. Calvin leaned over. Don't worry. What she did was completely out of line. If you'd like to file a formal complaint, I'd be happy to serve as a witness. Zara thanked him, then noticed Bethany speaking into the crew telephone, repeatedly glancing back toward seat 2A with a triumphant expression. I think she's reporting me to someone, Zara whispered to Calvin. Let her, Calvin replied. She's digging her own grave. What Zara didn't know was that Bethany was indeed reporting her not to the captain, but directly to the co-pilot through the secure line, deliberately bypassing Captain Morris. This is Senior Flight Attendant, Palmer, Bethany said into the phone. We have a situation in first class that may require security upon landing. Passenger in 2A has suspicious materials relating to aircraft fuel systems and has become confrontational when questioned, requesting ground security meet the aircraft upon arrival. Co-pilot Alexander Hayes, unaware of any connection between the captain and the passenger in question, agreed to alert Heathrow security as requested. When Bethany returned to the cabin, she made a point of passing by Zara's seat. For your information, she said, with poorly concealed satisfaction, security officers will be meeting this flight when we land. Perhaps they can help clarify any confusion about appropriate behavior on an aircraft. As Bethany walked away, Zara felt a wave of panic. She tried to call her father using the in-flight phone, but couldn't get a connection at cruising altitude. Though she knew she'd done nothing wrong, the prospect of being detained by airport security left her stomach in knots. Calvin, noticing her distress, passed her his business card. Calvin Reed, civil rights attorney, it read with contact information for a prestigious law firm. Document everything he advised quietly. Times, exact words, witnesses. This is textbook discriminatory treatment. I've handled dozens of similar cases. Meanwhile, in the galley, Sandra approached Bethany privately. Don't you think you're overreacting a bit? She's just a teenager with a science project. I'm protecting this aircraft, Bethany insisted. Why are you questioning my judgment? Is it because she's black? Would you be defending her so vigorously if she were white? Sandra blinked in surprise. That's not what I... It's fine if you want to lower your standards, Bethany interrupted, but I've worked too hard to maintain Atlantic's reputation for excellence. Our first-class cabin has a certain clientele who expect a particular environment. From her seat, Zara could only catch fragments of their conversation, but phrases like maintaining our standards and proper clientele carried clearly enough to confirm what she'd suspected all along. This wasn't about security. It was about who Bethany believed belonged in first class. As the plane began its descent toward London Heathrow, the captain's voice came over the intercom once more, announcing their approach. Moments later, another announcement followed. Ladies and gentlemen, this is First Officer Hayes speaking. Due to a security concern, we request that all passengers remain seated after landing until security personnel have boarded the aircraft. Thank you for your cooperation. Passengers exchanged concerned glances, many looking around the cabin to identify the potential threat. Multiple eyes settled on Zara, the only passenger who'd had a visible confrontation with the crew. For the first time since boarding, Zara felt truly afraid. She thought of her mother's warnings and her father's advice, wishing she had taken their concerns more seriously. As the plane touched down on British soil, she braced herself for what would come next. The aircraft taxied toward the gate engines, humming as passengers gathered their belongings in preparation for disembarkation. The mood in the first-class cabin had shifted dramatically. Tense whispers replaced the usual sounds of seatbelts unclicking and overhead compartments opening. Everyone remained seated, following the instruction to wait for security. Bethany moved efficiently through the cabin, collecting headphones and glasses with an air of smug satisfaction. When she passed Zara's seat, she paused. "When security arrives, I suggest you cooperate fully," she advised, her voice dripping with false concern. "It will make things easier for everyone." Calvin Reed, who had been quietly documenting the entire encounter in his legal notepad, looked up. "Miss Palmer, I hope you understand the potential legal ramifications of making false security reports based on discriminatory assumptions." Bethany's expression hardened. "Sir, I'm simply following security protocols. This has nothing to do with discrimination." "I've been on this flight for 7 hours," Calvin replied. "I've observed your interactions with every passenger in this cabin. I'm confident a court would find your pattern of behavior quite revealing." Bethany's cheeks flushed, but before she could respond, the aircraft door opened. 2 security officers in Heathrow Airport uniforms stepped into the first-class cabin. Officer James Reeves, a broad-shouldered man with a stern expression, and Officer Melissa Prescott, his more measured female colleague. Bethany immediately approached them, speaking in hushed but urgent tones. "Thank you for responding so quickly. The passenger in question is seated in 2A, the teenage girl. She has materials related to aircraft fuel systems and became combative when questioned." Officer Reeves nodded gravely, while Officer Prescott surveyed the cabin with a professional gaze. Together, they approached Zara's seat. "Miss, we need you to stand, please," Officer Reeves instructed firmly. Zara complied, her heart pounding. "May I ask what this is about?" "We've received a report of suspicious behavior and materials," Officer Reeves explained, his voice carrying throughout the now silent cabin. "We need to ask you some questions." "What suspicious material?" Zara asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Documents and digital files pertaining to aircraft fuel systems," Officer Prescott replied, somewhat more gently than her colleague. "Can you explain why you're in possession of such materials?" Zara took a deep breath. "I'm a keynote speaker at the International Conference on Sustainable Aviation. My research focuses on developing eco-friendly biofuels for commercial aircraft. All my materials are scientific in nature and publicly available." Officer Reeves looked skeptical. "You're claiming to be a keynote speaker. At your age?" "Yes," Zara replied, reaching slowly toward her backpack. "I have my credentials right here." "Don't move," Officer Reeves commanded sharply, causing several passengers to gasp. "Officer, she was merely reaching for her conference credentials," Calvin interjected calmly. "Sir, please don't interfere," Officer Reeves responded curtly. Bethany stepped forward. "Officers, if I may, this passenger has been disruptive throughout the flight, challenging crew authority and causing distress to other passengers." An elderly woman across the aisle scoffed audibly. "That's simply not true. This young lady has been nothing but polite. It's the flight attendant who's been inappropriate." Officer Prescott's radio crackled with a message which she listened to with a furrowed brow. Meanwhile, Officer Reeves continued his questioning. "May I see your passport and any credentials related to this conference?" he asked Zara. Zara carefully retrieved her passport and conference materials from her backpack, handing them to Officer Reeves. As he examined them, Officer Prescott whispered something in his ear, but he seemed to ignore her. "These appear legitimate," Officer Reeves admitted reluctantly. However, we still need to address the reported disruptive behavior. I wasn't disruptive, Zara stated firmly. I objected to having my personal belongings searched without consent while I used the restroom. She threatened me when I performed a routine security check, Bethany claimed loudly. That's a lie, Calvin interrupted, standing now. I witnessed the entire exchange. Miss Palmer searched this young woman's belongings without permission, then became hostile when questioned about it. I'm Calvin Reed, civil rights attorney with Reed Jackson and Associates. I'll be representing Miss Washington in any legal proceedings that may arise from this incident. Officer Prescott looked increasingly uncomfortable. Officer Reeves, I think we should. Miss Washington. Officer Reeves interrupted. Do you have a parent or guardian we can contact? My father, Zara began. She threatened to have her father deal with me, Bethany interjected. She implied he had connections that could cost me my job. I never said that. Zara protested, her composure finally cracking under the weight of the false accusations. Officer Reeves turned to Bethany. Did she make any specific threats toward you or the aircraft? Bethany hesitated only momentarily before nodding. She said I would regret questioning her. Given her materials about aircraft fuel systems, I interpreted that as potentially threatening. A collective gasp rose from the passengers who had witnessed the earlier exchange. That is categorically false, Calvin stated, his voice carrying the authority of the courtroom. Officer, this flight attendant is lying to you, and I have detailed notes of every interaction. Officer Prescott tugged at her colleague's sleeve, trying again to communicate something, but Officer Reeves had already made his decision. For security purposes, I'm going to need to detain you while we sort this out, he told Zara, reaching for his handcuffs. Please turn around and place your hands behind your back. Is that really necessary? Officer Prescott objected, finally speaking up. She's a teenager, not a... Protocol. Officer Reeves cut her off firmly. This is outrageous, Calvin protested. You have no probable cause. But Officer Reeves had already taken Zara's wrists, the cold metal of the handcuffs clicking into place with a finality that sent shockwaves through the cabin. Passengers watched in stunned silence as a 16-year-old black girl in first class was handcuffed for nothing more than existing in a space where others believed she didn't belong. Bethany stood nearby, a barely concealed smile of triumph playing at the corners of her mouth. But her victory would prove short-lived. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin crackled with tension as passengers witnessed Zara standing handcuffed in the aisle. Some averted their eyes, uncomfortable with the scene unfolding before them. Others stared openly, phones discreetly recording what many recognized as a blatant injustice. Officer Reeves positioned himself beside Zara, maintaining a firm grip on her arm despite the fact that she showed no signs of resistance. Officer Prescott stood slightly apart, her discomfort with the situation evident in her posture and expression. Now, Officer Reeves began, his voice carrying throughout the silent cabin. I'm going to ask you some questions about your presence on this flight and the materials in your possession. Shouldn't we conduct this interview somewhere private? Officer Prescott suggested quietly. Officer Reeves ignored his colleague. State your full name and purpose for traveling to London. Zara lifted her chin, struggling to maintain her dignity, despite the humiliation of being handcuffed in front of an entire cabin of strangers. My name is Zara Washington. I'm traveling to London to present my research on sustainable aviation fuel at the International Conference on Sustainable Aviation. And how did a teenager come to be invited to such a conference? Officer Reeves asked skeptically. I won the National Youth Science Foundation competition, Zara explained, her voice steady despite her racing heart. My research on converting agricultural waste into aviation fuel with reduced carbon emissions earned me the keynote student presentation spot. Bethany scoffed audibly from where she stood near the galley. That hardly seems likely. Calvin Reed stood up from his seat. Officer, I must object to this public interrogation. Miss Washington is a minor being questioned without parental consent or legal representation. I'm offering my services as her legal counsel until her parents can be contacted. "Sir, this is a security matter, not a legal proceeding," Officer Reeves replied dismissively. "Actually, Calvin countered, the moment you placed her in handcuffs, it became a legal matter with significant civil rights implications." Officer Reeves' radio crackled with an incoming message, which he acknowledged with a brief response before continuing his questioning. "Your passport shows you're an American citizen," he noted, flipping through Zara's documents. "Who arranged your travel? How did you come to be seated in first class?" As I explained to Miss Palmer multiple times, Zara replied, "The first-class ticket was part of my prize package from the Science Foundation. All of this is verifiable through my conference credentials, which you're currently holding." Officer Prescott examined the conference materials more closely. "These do appear legitimate," she murmured to her colleague. "The conference begins tomorrow at the Excel Center. Miss Washington is listed as the keynote student presenter." Bethany stepped forward. "Officers, regardless of whether her conference credentials are real, this passenger was disruptive during the flight. She challenged crew authority and created anxiety among other passengers." "That's not true," called out the elderly woman across the aisle. "My husband and I watched this entire situation unfold. This young lady was perfectly polite while being subjected to discriminatory treatment." Her husband nodded in agreement. "In my 30 years as a judge, I've never seen such a blatant abuse of authority. This flight attendant targeted her from the moment she boarded." Other passengers began to voice their observations, creating a growing chorus of dissent against Bethany's claims. Officer Reeves raised his hand for silence. "We need to establish the facts," he insisted. "Miss Washington, I'm going to need to examine your electronic devices as well." "No, you don't," Calvin interjected. "Not without a warrant. Miss Washington, you don't have to consent to any search of your devices." Zara looked between the attorney and the officer, uncertain about her rights on foreign soil. "I'd like to contact my father," she said. "He can verify everything I've told you." "In due time," Officer Reeves replied. "First, we need to complete our security assessment." Officer Prescott said more urgently, "This time I've just received another message from control. We need to speak privately." Reeves sighed with frustration, but finally stepped aside with his colleague. As they conferred in hushed tones at the front of the cabin, Calvin approached Zara. "Don't say anything more," he advised quietly. "They have no legitimate reason to detain you. This is clearly discriminatory enforcement." "I didn't do anything wrong," Zara whispered, fighting back tears that threatened to undermine her composed facade. "I know," Calvin assured her, "and we're going to make sure everyone else knows it too." Across the cabin, the conversation between the security officers had grown more intense. Officer Prescott appeared to be insisting on something, while Officer Reeves repeatedly shook his head. Meanwhile, the remaining passengers had begun to disembark from the economy and business class sections, filing past the first-class cabin where Zara stood handcuffed in the aisle. Many slowed to observe the scene, some capturing images on their phones, despite flight attendants attempting to hurry them along. Bethany, noticing the growing documentation of the incident, approached Officer Reeves. "Shouldn't we move this somewhere less public?" she suggested, her earlier confidence beginning to waver. Officer Reeves returned to Zara. "We're going to continue this discussion in the terminal security office. Please come with us." "I'm not going anywhere without legal representation," Zara stated firmly, recalling her mother's advice about knowing her rights. "This isn't America," Officer Reeves replied. "British aviation security protocols don't require—" Actually, Officer Prescott interrupted. "Under Section 42 of the UK Border Security Act, minors detained for questioning are entitled to appropriate adult representation." Officer Reeves shot his colleague an irritated glance. "Fine. The attorney can accompany us." Just as they prepared to escort Zara from the aircraft, a commotion at the front of the cabin drew everyone's attention. The cockpit door had opened, and Captain Raymond Morris emerged, still wearing his uniform with 4 gold stripes gleaming on each shoulder. Having completed his post-landing procedures and system shutdowns, Captain Morris had finally been informed by the flight engineer about a security situation in first class. Nothing could have prepared him for the sight that greeted him as he stepped into the cabin, his daughter standing handcuffed between 2 security officers. Captain Raymond Morris stood frozen for a split second, taking in the unimaginable scene. Before him, his daughter Zara in handcuffs, surrounded by security officers, while flight attendant Bethany Palmer hovered nearby with a self-satisfied expression. 25 years of military and commercial aviation training had taught Raymond to remain calm in crises, but seeing his child detained like a criminal tested the limits of his composure. The cabin fell silent as his commanding presence filled the space. Even passengers who had been murmuring among themselves stopped mid-sentence. Raymond moved purposefully down the aisle, his face a carefully controlled mask of professional concern that only Zara could recognize as barely contained fury. "What's happening here?" he asked, his deep voice resonating with authority. Officer Reeves straightened his posture instinctively, responding to the captain's commanding presence. "Sir, we're handling a security situation with a disruptive passenger. Everything is under control." Raymond's gaze shifted from the officers to his daughter's handcuffed wrists, then to Bethany Palmer, whose triumphant expression was rapidly dissolving into uncertainty. "Remove those handcuffs immediately," Raymond ordered his tone, leaving no room for debate. Captain Bethany interjected, stepping forward. "This passenger has been problematic throughout the flight. She had suspicious materials related to aircraft fuel systems and became confrontational when questioned." "I was simply following security protocols by reporting." "That's my daughter you're detaining," Raymond interrupted, his voice cutting through Bethany's explanation like a blade. The revelation sent shockwaves through the cabin with audible gasps from passengers and crew alike. "And I'm not just her father, I'm your boss." Bethany's face drained of color as the implications hit her. "Your daughter?" "Yes," Raymond confirmed. "And as of yesterday, I'm also the new Chief Operations Officer for Atlantic Airlines." Officer Reeves looked between the captain and Zara, confusion evident on his face. "Sir, we received a security alert about a passenger with suspicious materials who had threatened staff. My daughter is a keynote speaker at the International Conference on Sustainable Aviation," Raymond explained, with measured patience. "Her research on sustainable aviation fuel won the National Youth Science Foundation competition. Those suspicious materials are her presentation on technology that could revolutionize our industry." Officer Prescott had already begun unlocking Zara's handcuffs. "I tried to tell you," she murmured to her colleague as the restraints came off. Control radioed twice that there might be a misunderstanding. Zara rubbed her wrists, fighting back tears of relief and lingering humiliation. Raymond placed a protective hand on his daughter's shoulder, his eyes never leaving Bethany's increasingly panicked face. "Captain Morris," Bethany stammered. "I had no idea she was your daughter. She never mentioned." "Would it have mattered?" Miss Palmer, Raymond asked quietly. "Would you have treated her with basic human dignity if you'd known who her father was? Or is respect only reserved for passengers who look a certain way?" Bethany's mouth opened and closed, no coherent defense forthcoming. Calvin Reed, who had been observing the exchange with professional interest, stepped forward. "Captain Morris, I'm Calvin Reed, civil rights attorney. I've been documenting Miss Palmer's discriminatory treatment of your daughter since boarding. It's been quite systematic. I can attest to that," offered the elderly woman across the aisle. "My husband and I watched this flight attendant target your daughter, repeatedly questioning her presence in first class, ignoring her requests, and providing substandard service." Other passengers began voicing similar observations, creating a damning chorus of testimony against Bethany, who seemed to shrink with each accusation. Raymond turned to Officer Reeves. "I want to review the security footage from this aircraft immediately." "Atlantic Airlines records all cabin activity for safety purposes." "Of course, sir," Officer Reeves replied, his earlier confidence replaced by professional deference. "And I'll be requiring written statements from any passengers who witnessed my daughter's treatment," Raymond continued. "Mr. Reed, would you be willing to coordinate that process?" "Absolutely," Calvin agreed. "I believe we have plenty of willing witnesses." Sandra Miller, who had been watching the scene unfold with growing horror, stepped forward hesitantly. "Captain Morris I. I should have intervened. Miss. Palmer's behavior seemed excessive, but I didn't speak up firmly enough. Raymond nodded, acknowledgement of her admission. We'll discuss crew dynamics during the investigation, Miss Miller. Turning to Bethany, whose face had gone from pale to ashen, Raymond's voice took on an edge of steel. Miss Palmer, you're suspended, effective immediately, pending a full investigation. Please surrender your crew credentials to First Officer Hayes and prepare for debriefing with Atlantic's HR representative who will meet us at the gate. But Captain Bethany protested weakly. I was following security protocols. What you were following, Raymond interrupted, were your own prejudices. And you used Atlantic Airlines security protocols as a weapon to humiliate a 16-year-old girl whose only offense was being black in first class. The brutal truth of his assessment silenced Bethany completely. Raymond turned to address the remaining passengers. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Atlantic Airlines, I sincerely apologize for this unfortunate incident and the delay in your disembarkation. Our ground staff will assist you with any connecting flights or transportation needs. Thank you for your patience and understanding. As the passengers began to gather their belongings, many approached Zara with words of support and business cards offering to provide statements about what they had witnessed. Calvin efficiently collected contact information from willing witnesses, his legal mind already framing the incident in terms of potential litigation. Officer Reeves, now thoroughly embarrassed by his role in the situation, addressed Raymond. Captain Morris, we'll need to file an incident report explaining the nature of the misunderstanding. Misunderstanding is a rather generous characterization, Raymond replied coolly. But yes, we'll provide full statements. After my daughter has had a moment to recover from being publicly handcuffed and humiliated for the crime of flying while black, Zara, finally letting the professional mask slip, leaned against her father's shoulder. I should have listened to you and Mom, she whispered. Raymond embraced his daughter briefly. This isn't your fault, Zara. Not one bit of it. And trust me when I say this incident will lead to meaningful changes at Atlantic Airlines. As they prepared to disembark, Bethany stood frozen near the galley, the realization of her career-ending mistake finally sinking in. Her 20 years of service, her seniority, her reputation, all potentially destroyed by her own biased assumptions, and the arrival of the one person she never expected to witness them, the father of the girl she had so carelessly mistreated. And not just any father, but her new boss. A sleek conference room on the executive floor of Heathrow Airport hummed with tension. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the bustling tarmac. But none of the room's occupants paid attention to the panoramic view of planes taking off and landing in the gray London sky. Raymond Morris sat at the head of the polished table, still in his captain's uniform, radiating controlled anger. Beside him, Zara maintained a poised demeanor despite the emotional turmoil of the past few hours. Across from them sat 3 representatives from Atlantic Airlines' legal and human resources departments who had been hastily summoned from the London corporate office. Calvin Reed, who had offered his legal services pro bono, sat beside Zara, reviewing notes from passenger statements he'd collected. The door opened, and 2 more people entered. Jennifer Watkins, Atlantic Airlines Chief Diversity Officer, and Michael Chen, the airline's General Counsel, both having taken the first available flight from New York after being notified of the incident. Let me begin by offering our most sincere apologies. Michael Chen began addressing Zara directly. What happened today represents a complete failure of our company values and training protocols. Apologies are appreciated, Raymond replied, but what my daughter experienced goes beyond a simple customer service failure. This was racial discrimination, plain and simple. Jennifer Watkins nodded gravely. We agree, Captain Morris. That's why we're here in person, to ensure this incident receives the serious attention it deserves. Calvin Reed placed a folder on the table. I've collected statements from 12 passengers who witnessed Miss Palmer's behavior throughout the flight. They uniformly describe a pattern of discriminatory treatment that began the moment Zara entered the first-class lounge. We've also reviewed the security footage, Michael confirmed, sliding a tablet toward Raymond. It corroborates everything Miss Washington and the witnesses reported. The tablet displayed multiple camera angles from the aircraft cabin, clearly showing Bethany's differential treatment of passengers, her unauthorized search of Zara's belongings, and her misleading statements to security. Officers. Raymond watched a portion of the footage, his jaw tightening, and Miss Palmer's explanation for her actions. Jennifer exchanged glances with the HR representative. Miss Palmer maintained she was following security protocols. However, when pressed about why she applied those protocols exclusively to your daughter, her responses became problematic. She referenced maintaining standards and the expectations of premium customers. Code for racial gatekeeping, Calvin observed dryly. Where is she now? Zara asked, speaking up for the first time since entering the conference room. In a separate debriefing, Michael replied, "We've suspended her pending the conclusion of our investigation, but based on the evidence already gathered, termination seems inevitable." Raymond shook his head. Firing one flight attendant won't solve the underlying problem. This incident reveals systemic issues in how Atlantic trains and manages its staff. Exactly why I'm here, Jennifer agreed. Captain Morris, your new role as COO, puts you in a unique position to implement meaningful change. This unfortunate incident could become a catalyst for transformation within Atlantic Airlines. Zara straightened in her chair. I don't want this to just be about punishing Miss Palmer. There need to be systemic changes. Calvin nodded approvingly at Zara's observation. My firm specializes in aviation discrimination cases. Unfortunately, Miss Washington's experience is far from unique. We've represented dozens of passengers of color who've experienced similar treatment across multiple airlines. Mr. Reed is right, Jennifer confirmed. The industry has a documented problem with discriminatory treatment, particularly in premium cabins where passengers of color are still underrepresented. Raymond turned to Michael Chen. I want a complete audit of all passenger complaints involving racial discrimination filed against Atlantic over the past 5 years. I suspect Miss Palmer's behavior wasn't isolated, nor was it likely the first time she'd acted this way. The HR representative shifted uncomfortably. Actually, sir, our preliminary review has already uncovered 3 previous complaints against Miss Palmer that were inadequately addressed. Buried, you mean, Raymond corrected. Essentially, yes, the representative admitted. They were dismissed as customer misunderstandings by her previous supervisors. Calvin made a note. That establishes a pattern of behavior the airline was aware of, but failed to address. Legally speaking, that significantly increases Atlantic's liability. Michael Chen cleared his throat. Which brings us to the question of compensation. Atlantic Airlines is prepared to offer— I'm not interested in hush money, Zara interrupted firmly. What happened today was humiliating and traumatic, but throwing money at me won't fix the problem for the next person who looks like me and flies first class. Raymond looked at his daughter with pride. What would you prefer instead, Zara? Zara considered for a moment. I want Atlantic Airlines to implement mandatory anti-bias training for all customer-facing staff. I want clear reporting procedures for passengers who experience discrimination with actual accountability. And I want a commitment to increasing diversity among flight crews, especially in leadership positions. Jennifer Watkins was already taking notes. These are excellent suggestions, Miss Washington. In fact, I've been advocating for similar initiatives, but they've been repeatedly deprioritized in our budget discussions. They won't be deprioritized any longer, Raymond stated with finality. Not while I'm COO. Michael Chen looked somewhat relieved. We can certainly implement those changes. Of course, we'd still like to offer appropriate compensation for the distress caused today. Any compensation should be directed toward scholarships for underrepresented students in aviation and STEM fields, Zara decided. That would be more meaningful than personal payment. The meeting continued for another hour, with specific action items assigned and timelines established for implementing the changes Zara had requested. As they wrapped up, a gentle knock came at the door, and a staff member entered with an urgent message for Raymond. Captain Morris, I apologize for the interruption, but there's a situation with Miss Palmer you should be aware of. Raymond excused himself and stepped outside. When he returned, moments later, his expression was grim. "Miss Palmer is threatening to sue for wrongful termination," he informed the room. "She's claiming she's the victim of reverse discrimination and that she's being made a scapegoat to appease social justice warriors." Calvin laughed without humor. "Let her try. With the evidence we have, she wouldn't make it past summary judgment. She's demanding to speak with senior management," Raymond continued. "Specifically, she wants to speak with the COO to explain her side of the story." Jennifer raised an eyebrow. "She still doesn't realize that's you." "Apparently, her suspension happened so quickly that the connection hasn't been made clear," Raymond replied. "The HR team thought I should be aware before they inform her." "What are you going to do?" Zara asked. Raymond considered for a moment. "I think it's time Miss Palmer understands exactly who she's dealing with and the consequences of her actions." As the meeting adjourned, arrangements were made for Zara to be escorted to her hotel to prepare for her conference presentation the following day. Calvin promised to remain in London until the situation was fully resolved, offering his continued legal support. Before they parted ways, Raymond embraced his daughter. "I am so proud of how you handled yourself today," he told her quietly. "You showed more grace and wisdom than anyone should have to in such circumstances." Zara smiled wanly. "I just keep thinking about what Mom said before I left, about some people never seeing past the color of my skin no matter my accomplishments." "Your mother is a wise woman," Raymond agreed. "But what matters is how we respond to that reality. We can let it defeat us, or we can use it to create change. Today, you chose the latter." As Raymond prepared to meet with Bethany Palmer one final time in his official capacity as Atlantic Airlines' new Chief Operations Officer, he carried with him not just the authority of his position, but the righteous purpose of a crass father determined to create a better world for his daughter and for everyone who shared her experience. 6 months had passed since the incident on Atlantic Airlines Flight 207. The London skyline glittered through the windows of the Royal Aeronautical Society's Grand Ballroom, where hundreds of aviation industry leaders had gathered for the annual Sustainability Innovation Awards. Zara Washington, now 17, stood at the podium in a tailored blue suit, her confidence evident, as she addressed the distinguished audience. "1 year ago, I was just a student with an idea," she began, her voice clear and strong. "Today, that idea is transforming how we think about aviation fuel." Projected behind her were the impressive results of her sustainable aviation fuel implementation, a 40% reduction in carbon emissions across Atlantic Airlines' test fleet, with plans to expand the program industry-wide in May, the coming year. In the front row, Raymond Morris watched his daughter with undisguised pride. Beside him sat Dr. Amara Washington, who had flown in specially for the awards ceremony, and Calvin Reed, whose civil rights firm had become a key partner in Atlantic's corporate transformation. What began as scientific research became something much more. Zara continued, her gaze sweeping across the audience. It became a catalyst for change, not just in how we fuel our aircraft, but in how we fuel our corporate culture. She didn't need to elaborate. The story of what had happened on that flight 6 months ago had become widely known throughout the aviation industry. What had begun as a traumatic experience of discrimination had evolved into a powerful case study in institutional change. After the incident, Raymond Morris had used his position as COO to implement sweeping reforms at Atlantic Airlines. The mandatory anti-bias training program Zara had requested was now in place, with every employee, from baggage handlers to executive leadership, required to complete it annually. Bethany Palmer had been terminated after a thorough investigation uncovered a long history of discriminatory behavior that previous management had systematically ignored. Her threatened lawsuit had evaporated once Calvin Reed presented the overwhelming evidence against her, including footage from the aircraft cameras and dozens of witness statements. More significantly, Atlantic Airlines had established a passenger advocate office staffed by professionals trained to investigate and address discrimination complaints. The program had already resolved over 50 cases that might previously have been dismissed or buried. Innovation isn't just about technology, Zara told the audience. It's about challenging outdated systems and beliefs that hold us back from our full potential, both as an industry and as a society. As Zara concluded her speech, the audience rose in a standing ovation. Industry publications had already begun referring to her dual innovations, both scientific and social, as the Washington Protocols, a framework for technological and cultural advancement in aviation. At the reception following the ceremony, Zara found herself surrounded by aviation executives, eager to discuss both her fuel research and Atlantic's new inclusion initiatives. Raymond observed from a distance, allowing his daughter the professional recognition she had earned. "She's remarkable," Calvin commented, joining Raymond at the edge of the crowd. Most teenagers would have been traumatized into silence by what happened. She turned it into a movement. "She gets that from her mother," Raymond replied, with a smile glancing at Amara, who was deep in conversation with Jennifer Watkins about Atlantic's new mentorship program for minority youth interested in aviation and STEM careers. The program, named the Zara Washington Initiative, had already awarded scholarships to 50 promising students from underrepresented communities. Zara herself served as a mentor regularly, speaking at schools in predominantly minority neighborhoods about careers in aviation science. "How's Sandra doing in her new role?" Calvin asked, referring to Sandra Miller, the flight attendant who had failed to intervene during Bethany's discriminatory behavior. "Better than expected," Raymond acknowledged. "After acknowledging her failure to act, she's become one of our most effective advocates for change. She's now heading our passenger experience division with a specific focus on inclusive service standards." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a young flight attendant, a recent graduate of Atlantic's new training program which emphasized cultural competence alongside traditional service skills. "Captain Morris," the young woman said, "respectfully, your daughter's transportation to Heathrow is ready whenever she's finished here. She has a first-class seat reserved on tomorrow's flight to New York." "Thank you, Maya," Raymond replied, recognizing one of the program's first graduates. "Please let her know there's no rush." As the flight attendant departed, Calvin observed, "From what I've heard, Atlantic's first-class experience has become significantly more inclusive these past few months." "It had better be," Raymond said firmly. "We've implemented anonymous testing protocols to ensure all passengers receive equal treatment regardless of race, gender, or appearance. Any staff member failing those tests is immediately enrolled in additional training." Across the room, Zara had finally extricated herself from the crowd of admirers and joined her mother. "Ready to go, sweetheart?" Amara asked. "You must be exhausted." "Actually," Zara replied, "I'd like to stay a bit longer. The director of NASA's Alternative Fuel Division wants to discuss adapting my research for spacecraft applications." Amara laughed. "From commercial aircraft to rockets in 6 months. At this rate, you'll be revolutionizing interstellar travel before you finish college." As mother and daughter shared the moment, Raymond reflected on the conversation he and Zara had in their kitchen a year earlier when she had dismissed his warnings about the discrimination she might face. The memory brought a mixture of sadness and pride. Sadness that his daughter had to learn such a harsh lesson, but pride in how she had transformed that experience into meaningful change. The following morning, Zara boarded her Atlantic Airlines flight back to New York. As she settled into her first-class seat, the lead flight attendant approached Maya, the same young woman who had spoken to her father the previous evening. "Miss Washington, welcome aboard." Maya greeted her warmly, genuine respect evident in her voice. "It's an honor to have you flying with us today. May I offer you a beverage before takeoff?" Zara accepted a glass of apple juice, noting the difference between this interaction and her experience 6 months earlier. As the plane taxied toward the runway, she gazed out the window at the London skyline, gradually receding from view. On her laptop, she opened a document containing her mother's pre-flight advice from a year ago. "Keep your boarding pass visible. Dress professionally. Have your credentials accessible. Remain calm, speak clearly, and know your rights." Zara smiled sadly at the memory of how she had dismissed those warnings. Her mother had been right, but what she hadn't anticipated was how Zara would respond to the experience, not with fear or retreat, but with determination to create lasting change. As the aircraft lifted into the sky, Zara reflected on the dual legacy of that fateful flight, her scientific research now being implemented across the aviation industry, and the social reforms her experience had catalyzed. What had begun as one flight attendant's discriminatory actions had transformed into an opportunity to address long-standing inequities in an entire industry. The flight attendant's voice came over the intercom as they reached cruising altitude. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Atlantic Airlines Flight 208 to New York. Today's crew is proud to serve you as part of Atlantic's commitment to excellence and inclusion for all passengers." Zara smiled at the new addition to the standard announcement, a small but significant change that reflected a larger transformation. She opened her presentation notes, preparing for her next speaking engagement at a New York high school, where she would encourage students of color to pursue careers in aviation and STEM. On her screen, a photograph captured her attention, a group shot taken the previous day with the first cohort of scholarship recipients from the Zara Washington Initiative. 20 young faces beamed at the camera, their futures in aviation now more accessible because one teenager had refused to let discrimination define her experience. As the plane soared across the Atlantic, Zara realized that sometimes the most important journeys weren't measured in miles, but in the distance between where we start and the changes we create along the way. What do you think about how Zara handled this difficult situation? Would you have done anything differently? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story moved you or made you think about discrimination in everyday spaces, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more stories of justice and resilience. And don't forget to share this video with someone who needs to hear this message today. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the most powerful response to discrimination isn't just standing up for yourself, but creating lasting change for others. This story illustrates how racism persists in spaces where people of color are underrepresented regardless of one's achievements or qualifications. It shows how individuals with power can weaponize policies and protocols to discriminate, often hiding behind professional language while enforcing personal biases. The most powerful lesson, however, is that confronting discrimination isn't just about individual justice, but creating systemic change. Zara didn't merely seek punishment for Bethany. She demanded institutional reforms that would protect future travelers. True progress requires both accountability for discriminatory actions and structural changes to prevent recurrence. When discriminatory incidents occur, the response from leadership matters tremendously. Raymond used his position not just to defend his daughter, but to transform an entire company culture. This reminds us that confronting racism effectively requires both individual courage and institutional commitment to meaningful change. What experiences with discrimination have you encountered or witnessed in supposedly premium spaces? Have you ever had to stand up against unfair treatment based on race or other factors? Share your story in the comments below. If this narrative about confronting racism and creating lasting change resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of justice and resilience. Don't forget to share this video with friends who might benefit from seeing how one person's stand against discrimination can transform an entire system. Thank you for watching, and remember your voice matters in creating a more just and equitable world for everyone.